The views expressed are not necessarily those of the management or ownership of KSTP-AM 1500 ESPN.
This is the place to talk about everything related to the home. Buying or selling real estate, financing and improvements that can help increase your home's value. This is Minnesota Home Talk on Score North. Here's your host, Jason Walgrave.
Good morning, and welcome to Minnesota Home Talk here. I'm your host, Mike Ouverson with Illuminate Home Loans this morning. Jason is, I think he's running in a track meet, is what he said. Told me
he's going to do it himself.
I think he's running in.
Sweet.
Or maybe it's his sons. I can't remember. One of the two. Or maybe he's running against his sons in the track meet. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure I think Joseph could probably beat him in a race now.
Is he that quick?
You think so?
I still try to race against my kids. It's they're getting close, but
I don't think it's because Joseph is that quick. I think Jason's that slow.
Okay. Then I can see it.
That's where I'm going with this one. Anywho, so Jason is not with us, but in his place, we brought on another Walgrave to talk some tax stuff with us. So we have Jonathan Walgrave here with ICS Tax LLC in with us. We're going to be talking about short-term versus long-term rentals. And Jonathan is the perfect fit for this because I know that he has owned a long-term rental for several years. And one of his specialties is short-term rentals. And he actually does CPA work for really any income-producing property that's out there. So whether it's a single-family short-term rental or all the way up to commercial and apartment buildings, that's what he does. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of short-term versus long-term rentals, and then just some of his own experiences with those pros and cons as well, and some of the tax benefits that might come along with them. As always, we got the phone lines open. Call in or text in this morning with any question dealing with mortgages or real estate, or any sort of tax question too, dealing around real estate, and we will answer those questions live on air. The call-in line is 651-647-2910. Again, 651-647-2910. And you can text in your questions too to 763-443-5664. Again, 763-443-5664. We're going to be giving away a prize for the best question of the morning. So the person with the best question of the morning is going to win, what do we got? 4 St. Paul Saints tickets, Evan?
Yeah, 4 St. Paul Saints tickets.
4 St. Paul Saints tickets is the giveaway this morning to the best question. So, again, you can call in at 651-647-2910, or you can text us your questions at 763-443-5664. See how I remembered that one, Evan?
Yeah.
Top of my head?
Took a while.
We've only had those numbers now for how long?
A year?
A year.
Have we been in here a year now?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think at least a year. So the thing is that we had a different number when we were in the other studio.
Yeah.
So that number after 9 years got ingrained in our head. So when we moved to this studio and it was a different number, Jason and I messed it up every single time. Evan was correcting us for the first, good 12 months probably.
Well, that's probably why some of my questions a year ago weren't getting answered.
Yeah, right.
Thought you were just ignoring
We
me.
don't answer questions on the show. That's the real secret.
We purposely give the wrong number so we don't have to answer questions live because we don't know what you're talking about.
We only take questions from a few specific textures. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So phone line again is open 651-647-2910 and the text line 763-443-5664. Okay, so 2 main topics today. We're going to talk about interest rates, where we think they're going, what happened this week, and the differences between the loan programs. And the other nice thing about having Jonathan in here is he's also a client of ours who recently we had a closing with. And he saw the ups and the downs of interest rates and how, the conventional loans differ from the jumbo loans and all this other stuff here. So we're going to dive right into that now. So as far as interest rates go, you have 4 really main categories, right? You got your conventional loans, you have FHA, you have VA, and then you have jumbo loans. Okay, so conventional loan, I would say probably 80% of the loans done out there right now are conventional loans. So a conventional loan amount is anything that fits Fannie and Freddie guidelines. The max loan amount that you can get on a conventional loan is $647,200. So if your loan amount is $647,200 or less, you can do a conventional loan. Interest rate as of yesterday, which was Friday, ended at 6.125 on a 30-year fixed.
Oh boy.
So is it the highest that we've seen since last time they were in the sixes? Really, the last time they ever hit the sixes that I can remember was pre-crash.
Yeah.
Was probably 2006 to 2007 was the last time we had rates in the sixes.
Yep. I think I had 6.25 on our townhouse in 2005.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. The highest that I ever remember them hitting was in 2006 at 6.75. And I've been doing this since June of 04. So June of 04 is when I got into the mortgage business. The highest I've ever seen is 6.75. I know that in the early 2000s, they were 8.5, 8.75 roughly, and that was just the norm. But we ended up this Friday at 6.125%. Now, an FHA loan, they have a max loan amount of $448,500. Okay, so max loan amount $448,500. Now, they ended at 5.5%, so 5.5% on Friday. But here's the kicker. The FHA loans and the VA loans now, they all have mandatory discount points you need to pay.
Really?
So that 5.5%, I can't go any higher and not charge you discount points. That 5.5% is probably going to require you to pay 1% in discount points. So what does that mean? You're paying 1% of your loan amount as an additional closing costs on top of your other closing costs, your appraisal fee and your title fees and things like that. The VA rate, it was also at 5.5% as of yesterday. Same thing, got discount points to pay. So a lot of people are like, well, why is that? A lot of interest rate where they set them or how they calculate those, where they put them at, is based on what they think is going to happen in the future. So everyone on the mortgage side of things is thinking that, hey, recession is coming. If we're not in it right now, we're definitely nearing it. And what happens with a recession is rates typically go down. Right? So anyone who's going to be doing an FHA loan today at 5.5% is probably going to refinance that loan sometime in the next 12 to 24 months when a recession hits. So that's a short-term loan. That's only a 12 to 24 month loan where you're getting interest at 5.5%. So the only way these investors are like, well, why am I going to throw out $400,000 out there knowing that's just going to be a short-term deal? So what they do is they price in the mandatory discount point. Okay, we'll give you 5.5%, but we're going to get some money up front. And that guarantees that we got some money coming in on this thing, knowing that it's probably going to be refinanced shortly in the future.
Interesting.
So that's why you see mandatory discount points in FHA. That's why you see it on VA loans. Conventional loans, not so much. You still have what's called a par rate where you don't have to pay any discount points to get, but your rate is also higher.
Yep.
You get 6.125 versus 5.5 for FHA and VA. So now that brings us to jumbo. So jumbo loans, that's any loan amount that's over $647,200. So that starts at $647,201. Those rates or those loans typically are not bought and sold on the secondary market. You can do that. There's a secondary market for them. But typically, whoever you're locking with and closing with, they're typically not selling that. They're keeping it on their books, which means that they can kind of make their own rules as far as here's the requirements to be approved for this and blah, blah, blah. That ended 4.875 on a 30-year fixed on yesterday. So you got conventional at 6.125. You got FHAs and VAs at 5.5, but you got the mandatory discount point to pay. And then you had jumbo at 4.875. Does that make any sense? Borrow more, pay less?
I mean, actually, yes.
It does?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. What's your thought process in that?
It's simpler.
It's simpler?
Yeah, no. So okay. So from a really broad perspective, the underwriting guidelines for jumbo loans are more stringent.
Yep.
So you have a narrower client base, and you're doing less volume, and so you have to induce it somehow by saying, "Hey, come and do a loan with us." Mm-hmm. Simpler.
Incentivize the top tier borrowers.
Exactly.
Because jumbo loans are harder to qualify for. You have to have a higher credit score. You got to have more money for reserves. you got to have different credit requirements as far as, okay, I got the score, but you also have then trade line requirements. So you got to have a certain amount of trade lines. You got to have one for at least, a lot of times 36 months, and you got to have two more that are at least 12 to 24 months. So you have different guidelines and stuff around those for sure.
There's also more room in what you can do with the properties, right? Because
On
the
jumbo?
underwriting is more bank driven rather than federal form driven.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too. It is a little bit more open on that aspect because there's some government involvement, and it's the government involvement on this is more of, we want to make sure that you're disclosing the correct information to the customer, but not so much as to where the government's going to be buying this loan. The government's going to say, here's what we want for the requirements. They're like, but hey, you set your own requirements as far as your risk tolerances and your interest rates. We just want to make sure that you have the same disclosure stuff. So you still have to send out a loan estimate. You still have to get CDs signed before closing. You still got to do all that stuff.
You just have to comply with all the fair housing type stuff.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, but so Jonathan just built a house and we just closed on his end loan. And so you kind of saw it through the mix there of we were talking about interest rates, and it was like, you know, last fall they were here, and then all of a sudden this spring they're here, and this summer they're here, and we kind of had the rise in the fall of all this stuff. I mean, what do you think about interest rates, and kind of from what you saw from the process from start to finish?
So I think a little bit of a part that I'm trying to think if that's even like how that applies to where we are at with rates, but more so comes down to probably one-time closes.
Yeah.
So many people these days are able to do a one-time close before they're even, like, if they're building, they're locking that rate before they even start. And then in doing that, that dollar amount of the loan, though, it's stuck. Like throughout the whole process, if something starts going over, that's, costs coming out of pocket. We had, in our situation, that opportunity to do that. We decided to not go that route, and actually didn't expect rates to do anything outrageous. We were thinking maybe 0.25%, so let's just keep it kind of open book with what the cost might do in this. Yep. So at the end of the day, in our case, when we ended up adding a whole bunch of stuff to the house, so we our original cost kind of became a part of the past. At least we were able to, anything that we were investing into that house above and beyond the construction loan was able to kind of help us out in ultimately the cash to close. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, if I were to look back, and there's no way we would have had the same house if we would have done a one-time close. Sure, we'd have a screaming rate, but we'd probably be out a ton more money just to even, get into that loan. Yeah. So, I mean, it has been, I remember the first time, I think it was like February, you reached out saying, hey, rates jumped up to 3.75 or something like that while I was traveling, and I'm like, what? Like, what just happened? Like, these things were like 3 or 3.2. Like, this is not good. And then I remember we were thinking, well, they shouldn't go over 4. And so, we end up like riding it out, and then everybody just gets broadsided in the industry, and they keep going. And, you got friends on one side of the table going, oh, you got to lock, they're going to go up. But then you got experts on the other side going, this just can't happen. This is just out of control.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in our case, we are in a jumbo, and, thankfully we did, you helped find that bank that kind of like entered into the game there and didn't know what they were doing. It seemed like with offering a screaming rate. So locked up, and
worked out okay in the end.
Yeah. I feel it could have been a lot worse, but I'm actually pretty happy with how it shook out.
But you bring up a good point with that one-time close. So if you are building a new construction house, you do a one-time close. So if you start off with a loan amount of, let's say your original build cost was $800,000.
Yep.
Right? That's where initial bid came in at. And you're going to do a one-time close, and let's say you put a couple hundred down, so you're going to do a loan amount of $600,000 on that one-time close. Your loan amount can't change then. Correct. You're at $600,000. So now as you go through the build process, if you started at 8 and you're thinking, okay, $200,000 out of my pocket because maybe you sold a house and you had the equity from that house, so that's where your $200,000 is coming from. But now it goes and you add stuff, or you make changes, or there's a cost overrun, there's this, there's that. And let's say you go $100,000 over. Well, your loan amount is still stuck at $600,000. You can't say, hey, I need another $100,000 bank on this because, lumber costs more and we want to have nicer this or better that. You're coming on that $100,000 out of pocket.
Yep.
Is what you're doing. And so there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to either the 2-time close or the 1-time close.
Yep.
But yeah, it's interesting on where we started, the process where rates were starting at, because I think it was like 3.25. I think if we're
like last October, I think it was around that.
Yeah. And to where we ended, I think you ended at what,
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5. Yeah. So it ended up turning out, not too bad for you. But yeah, it's a little crazy here. I mean, looking down the road here, again, it kind of goes back to the whole FHA VA thing and why we see mandatory discount points on that. Everyone is thinking anyone who's doing a loan this year in 2022, basically from March of 2022 moving forward, all these home loans, they're all getting refinanced in the next 12 to 24 months.
Yep.
Because the recession that's coming, what happens with recession? Interest rates go down. They're all getting refinanced. So these investors now are pricing that into everything, saying, okay, this is going to be a short-term loan. Let's grab some money up front in the form of a discount point so that we have at least enough income coming in or ROI coming in to make that loan.
Is there ever any other drivers of why they would impose those fees to drive the rate down, or is this always like a major indicator of why you would do that?
So right now that's the main driver of all of that. Now they also look at then default rates, right? Because if you make a loan and there's a high percentage or a high probability that loan is going to default, that's again where discount points come in. So when you see lower credit scores, or you see where certainly you're pushing a certain debt to income ratio, you're going over these lines that they draw, your chance of, or the stats are going to show your chance of default on that loan are higher, they're greater. So again, if that loan is going to go into default, or if that loan's not going to be around for the long term, what do we do up front to make sure that we get some money, some ROI? We do the discount points.
Yep.
So that's where another spot that you'll see it is the whole risk tolerance, the risk level on there. They'll grab it up front.
And then, even, it seems like over the past few months, ARMs have been making a big swing back. Are they still, are you still seeing that now, even past few weeks?
Yeah, to be honest with you, not as much as I thought.
Okay.
Like I thought, 30-year fixed rates, they hit 6%. I thought it was going to be like, we're going to be doing half of our loans are going to be ARMs.
Yep.
Not the case.
Okay.
What was the that fancy marketing term that was being used for?
The hybrid fixed.
That's right. Hybrid.
They're not called ARMs. They're not called ARMs anymore.
We don't call them.
They're a hybrid fixed.
Yeah. We did have a text question come
Jonathan loves it.
Yeah, it's.
I'm like, is hybrid fixed because it's Raiders, because like grandma's helping out financing this? Or
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Because it gets fixed for some of the loan.
Yeah.
We did have a text question come in, and if you've had text question for us and want to potentially win some Saints tickets, best question of the morning is going to win those. 763-443-5664 for your text questions. That's 763-443-5664, or you can call in 651-647-2910 to call in and potentially win those Saints tickets. That's 651-647-2910. Andy asks, in regards to jumbo loans, what amount is the reserve requirement for a jumbo loan?
So that's a great question. Each investor will have different reserve requirements, and it also depends on how much you have down. So, for example, Chase guidelines. I know Chase guidelines because I just looked this up for a client yesterday. Same question. So with Chase, if you have 10% down, you need 18 months worth of reserves. So if your housing payment is going to be $6,000 a month, so 6,000 times 18, whatever that number is. What is that?
I don't know, 54 maybe?
98.
Oh, that high?
So
Yeah,
6,000
right.
times, so I think 98,000. So you need $98,000 shown in your bank accounts after you've put your money down into the deal. 18 months. If you
6,000 times 18?
6,000. So that's 60 and then 48.
Math.
Or 108.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, 108.
Yeah. You got there.
Numbers are hard for me, so that's why I got into mortgages.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because the computer does all the calculations for you.
Right. So again, I have 108 then in that scenario. Now, if you have anywhere between 10% down and 20% down, now that goes down to 12%. If you have 20% or more down, that goes down to 6 months. So 18 months reserves, and then 12 months reserves, and then 6 months reserves is what they require. On the Chase, I think each investor is different, so they might have different buckets, different amounts there. But in general, the more you have down, the less reserves you need, and the less down, the more reserves you need. So that's a good question, though.
So is there a strategy there where some people will, the timing of their current house selling, like in our case, we closed on the house that we were in back in April. So, we had all those funds on hand then to help the reserves. What if somebody was timing the change from their current house to the new house, like they're closing on the same day? Like, is there any factor of that?
So a house that is not sold can't be used as reserves. But if you're going to sell it on the same day, typically what happens is you're taking the proceeds from that sale and you're applying it towards this one over here. So that can be used towards your cash to close and all that stuff. And it actually can be used as reserves as long as it closes before you close on your loan on the next house. Other things that can cover reserves, so retirement accounts can cover reserves typically. You can only use 60% of what's in your retirement accounts, though, because if you had to liquidate in order to make a payment or something like that, you're paying tax penalties and this and that. And so that's why they use 60% of retirement funds. But you can use those for reserves. So there's a couple different ways to skin that cat.
Yeah.
But that's a good question. And if you have other questions, phone lines are open. 763-443. No, that's a text question.
Line.
Text line is 763-443-5664. And the phone line is 651-647-2910.
There you go. We did have one more text question come in. Jason asks, is it leg day?
Is it leg day? It's always leg day.
It's always leg day.
It's always leg day. Is that Jason Walgrave?
Of course it is.
Yes, of course it is.
Yeah.
You know what? It's funny. I had a client that would. Do you remember the mystery client that would always text in back when we were at the other studio? He'd always ask those questions.
Yeah.
And we never knew who it was. And then finally, after a couple years of him texting in and like almost every Saturday asking if it's leg day, he finally texted me out of the blue. He's like, "Hey, that's me texting in the whole time."
It was me the whole time.
Funny. Yeah. Michael Lindner is his name. Cool guy. Great guy.
Great.
So let's switch gears here. Let's bring it over to Jonathan Walgrave here with ICS Tax. We're going to talk about short-term versus long-term rentals. So again, the great benefit of having you in here is you've lived the long-term rental thing personally, and your business is highly based around short-term rentals.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved into that.
Yeah,
for the past couple of years, for sure.
So we get a lot of questions now of, well, which route do we go? Mm-hmm. Do we do the long-term rental thing? Do we do the short-term rental thing? We can talk about differences in qualifying and all that fun stuff. But I'm kind of turn it over to you. I know you got a list there to talk about of the pros and cons of each.
Yep. Yeah. So I kind of generated a list of things that. Sometimes for the long-term rental side, it would be, personal experiences. I have had long-term rental property since probably 2012 or 2013. But since probably, like I said, around that COVID time, short-term vacation rentals, Airbnbs, Verbos have just been exploding. And they're definitely a type of property that anyone in our industry that does, tax consulting regarding fixed assets on these real estate properties, before that time, we would have never really looked at them. Just largely they were not as prevalent, and their cost was just so cheap that there just wasn't an ROI for someone of our expertise to come in and analyze those properties. But now, the last couple of years, I can't think of really a time where we're not working on one. They are all over the place. People are sweeping these things up in vacation-y spots, Florida, Phoenix, California's kind of been, dropping down lately, but then there's even a place, Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. You ever been there?
Nope.
It's supposedly a great tourist area, and I'm going to be going back there for the third time.
Dang.
Just people are, and in this case, these are cabins that are built up in the mountains. I mean, gorgeous views. People are buying these things for, it was a couple years ago, like $1 million, $1.2 million, and now they're going for $2 million.
Dang.
And these things are, generally got capacities of, 12 to 16 people. They're like 8-bedroom, 9-bath places. Some of them have 2 kitchens, or the kitchen's just mirrored, basement pools, theater rooms. It largely intended for people to come in and they're renting these things for a week with their entire family vacation, and then there's like just a whole bunch of attractions and rides and things to go to. So like random areas like that are hitting up on the map. Even in Las Vegas, just south of the Strip, Las Vegas / Henderson's there. Those I've gone there now at least 3 or 4 times to see 3 or 4 at a time. It might be for 1 or 2 or multiple clients at a time, but they're starting to generate a demand even there where people, if let's say companies are going out on having like a retreat or something, and some of the executive leaders may elect to stay on an offsite house rather than somewhere in a typical Bellagio or something, and have their private meetings at that residence. So they are definitely something that has been a game changer for how people are invested in properties.
Do you think that shift is more of because there's other tax benefits that come along with that? Or do you think the shift to doing more short-term rental stuff was because the technology to be able to find them, book them, manage them, things like that has gotten that much better?
I definitely say it's the latter. There's a few things we can touch on later in regarding tax benefits between short and long term. Some of those rules are kind of obscure, but otherwise, I think it's people are now able to find these things and see them, and just even unrelated to this, but just like Turo. You ever heard of Turo?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. People are now renting their own cars. So technology is helping this stuff become more accessible. But then also, what has really exploded too with COVID pandemic, hotels and hospitality, people in general, when they're traveling, they've been less inclined to stay at a place that has people in it. And if they're renting in a short-term rental, they're getting a place to themselves. I
suppose, yeah.
And so people are finding that just more private. I mean, I don't know. I almost feel like COVID's going to generate a bunch of introverts. People are done staying at big hotels. But who knows? Whenever I travel, I do stay predominantly at hotels, and they are starting to fill back up. But yeah, for these short-term rentals, it's definitely a place that's giving people an option for just having their own space. And then also, now what's happened, this has been called I forget how they exactly coin it, but it's like the summer travel of revenge is how some articles have said it. And that's basically people that have been cooped up for the past couple of years, not able to travel. Regardless of the cost, they're going to travel, and they're going to spend whatever to get that, itch for vacation. And these short-term vacation rentals are exactly where people are sweeping this stuff up.
And the crazy thing is I literally see them everywhere. Mm-hmm. We went out to Grandma's 90th birthday party out in South Dakota, and this was probably 5 miles west of Yankton. If anyone knows where Yankton, South Dakota is, 5 miles west, there's a lake there where it's basically it's a river that they dammed, right? And it kind of made a lake, so it's part of the river, but it's it's got a lake name. I can't remember what it was, but there's literally VRBOs on this one strip that it's not even on the lake; it just overlooks it. You'd have to go, you have to drive down a ways and get down there to get to the lake. But you're VRBOing in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, at this thing, and that's where we found it. And so we went out there, and that's where we had Grandma's 90th birthday party. And so it's just crazy, like how these things pop up all over the place, and they probably have that thing. They probably have it rented out, in the summertime, probably 3 out of 4 weeks, I would imagine.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So some of the things that we can kind of talk about too is, so I've actually, even though I've had a long-term rental property now for whatever it's been, 8 or 9 years, we've been thinking about somewhere landing a short-term rental property. And so I basically kind of, have a bunch of pros and cons for each, or, major categories to consider. These are things that are going through my mind, or things that I'm actually seeing in our clients, or seeing which ones who are, making a shift to short-term rental, and kind of just digesting why they did that, or, where are they getting the benefit of that versus long-term. So, we can just start cruising through some of those. I think one of the predominant things right off the bat is what makes something short-term or long-term. I think there's what I'm going to call a realistic definition, and then there's an IRS definition. Realistic, if we're looking at anything long-term, it's anything that's leased for more than a month, but in all reality, it's 12 months. I mean, if anybody's renting something, you're generally doing at least a 12-month lease. Sometimes you'll get people 24, or they'll keep renewing at 1 year increments, or they might go month to month after their first year. Anything on a short-term rental is something that you're getting for days, weekends, weeks, maybe 2 weeks, but generally not much more than a month. And even a month is kind of considered pretty long if you were to land in a short term. So that's realistic, is kind of looking at stuff on a year basis versus a day or week basis. The way the IRS looks at it is under what's called transient use rules, and that's pretty much a 30-day cutoff. And so if you own a property and you're renting it for, if it's, predominant use is rented less than 30 days at a time, then you're in a short-term rental. If you're leasing it for more than 30 days at a time, then you land in the long-term. So that pretty much, separates those definitions. The next thing you're really thinking about is what type of people are going to be in here. When you're in a long-term, you are pre-screening tenants, you're doing background checks. At the end of the day, you might be showing your unit. You're going to have, every time I've renewed, I've had at least a dozen people to pick from, couples, individuals, whatever. And you're able to negotiate with each person kind of individually. Hey, how long are you willing to, sign a lease for? Like, I will sometimes pick, in my case, I've always picked people that will do 24 months just so this thing kind of goes on autopilot for, a while.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I'm selecting who's in there.
Right.
Or have some control of that selection. To where in a short-term rental, you kind of have your own kind of hotel out there, and whoever can click on it and pay for it, uses it, is who goes in there. So you do have less control over that, over who's using your property versus a long-term rental. The long-term, can basically have less turnover in that regard, just from the people that you're dealing with that are going in and out of your place. Other things with those actual, the people in your places, think about somebody that's in a long-term rental, and the people that are using your property are going to treat that place like home. It's generally furnished by their own, couches, smallwares, bedding, any of that stuff. You're generally giving them the structure. When you're in a short term, people aren't traveling and bringing their beds. So you are also adding to that cost or that responsibility that you are providing a fully furnished place. Now, it's also always hit or miss when you get into some of these places. Do they have toiletries in there or not? Sometimes there's a lot of people that, they'll check into a short-term rental and, hey, we got to make a Target run because there's no towels, or there's, no toilet paper, paper towels.
Gotcha.
But you're going to have couches, silverware, things to, to use and live in that place. And so a lot of the stuff that you may only need to get are consumables, but that's, kind of a difference there in just how the place is treated too. I mean, if you're in a short term, it's kind of people that are going to treat this like a hotel. They probably don't care as much about what's going on in the place. They're just, hey, I'm going to use this place. Hopefully I don't get no damages or anything. I'm in and out of here in a week. A long-term rental property, generally you're going to find people that are going to take more care of it, just because it's home to them.
Yep.
What other things they have noted on that? I guess the other thing too is, so a reason why we're also considering a short term somewhere is the personal use chances of it. If we were to get something down in Phoenix, for example, we can, if you're owner of a short term rental property, you can block that thing off for a certain amount of period and say, hey, we're going to go down and use this for vacation, or friends and family, or whoever wants to use it. To where in a long term, I never think about. Let's go.
Like that's somewhere I want to say between tenants here.
Yeah.
Let's go down there and hang out for a couple weeks.
Right. Yeah. It's just, so that can be a driver for somebody. It should be something to be thought about. Is there could be a short term benefit of if you land a property in a place, even if it's on a lake somewhere. It doesn't need to be somewhere in warm weather. It could be Minnesota up north, somewhere on a lake if it's not a restricted area. To have short term rentals where you can take advantage of taking your family there or using it on certain weekends and blocking it off.
Management wise, do you see people trying to manage short-term rentals on their own, or do they typically hire like a management company that will run the thing?
So I would say we're seeing both, and the only ones that I'm really seeing them manage on their own are those that are also pushing to become qualified real estate professionals. So these are, one of our biggest clients that has been just sweeping up short terms. He has now, he's like a full-time attorney, but he's been managing all of these properties. And so this guy keeps forwarding all of the, his people that are managing for us to do the analysis on a project. He's become a big source of work as well. But this guy now is being able to say for tax purposes that he's got, the 750-hour requirement, that he's an active real estate person, so that he's able to take his tax depreciation and losses on that property against his personal W-2 attorney income as well. So that's a pretty big commitment that he's doing. He's probably, working pretty long hours, but a lot of these people you will be directly conversing with the owner, so they will manage like the actual, bookings or request. But then when it comes down to somebody who's performing maintenance, routine maintenance, or fixing errors or doing the cleaning, that person is often a hired third party. And so sometimes these people, obviously may not even be where this property is. They could be, states away. But when you're booking, you're conversing with that person.
Yeah. I'm just thinking like, the short-term rentals, how many people have a short-term rental where they actually like live close enough to where they could do the cleaning, or they could do the checkouts and the check-in, they could do that type of stuff? I imagine that probably doesn't happen a whole lot. Yep. But on the long-term rental side, that probably happens a lot more, right? You're typically buying long-term rentals around you so that it's something that you can go to and you can probably help maintain and things like that. But the short-term rentals just seems like classic example. You live in Minnesota, you got one down in Florida or Arizona.
Yep.
I mean, you're not going down there to check people in and out and stuff like that.
Got to change the furnace filter. Got to fly down to Florida for a little bit.
Now going to that. Now, if you want to try to be the qualified real estate professional, because there's additional tax benefits that come along if you can meet that requirement. So we might have to dig into that a little bit more. But I mean, so let's say I have one down in Florida.
Yep.
Right. I got a short term down in Florida, and I go down there on every other week. So I fly down there every other week just to check on the property and do that type of stuff. Right. So the only reason why I'm going down there, right, quote unquote, the only reason why I'm going down there is so I can maintain my short-term rental.
Yep.
So the time that I leave my front doorstep to the time that I reach my front doorstep back here in Minnesota, can all of that time go towards that 750 hours? Because,
so those type of things, like what hours can you can or not include, that's gonna vary by CPA and who's willing to sign off on that.
Okay.
Because there's gonna be some out there that are gonna say travel time doesn't count. But then there's going to be others to be like, nope, as soon as, you're doorway to doorway, on your hours with that. So, but at the end of the day too, it generally, we don't see people that are like barely making the cutoff. It's either they're like hitting it, crushing it, or they're not even close.
Gotcha.
So sometimes you're not even really getting down to the travel aspect of that, but.
So when you guys talk to clients like that, is do you let them make the decision of you can count those if you want to, and it's kind of on you if the IRS comes a knocking, it's on you to defend, if you will.
It's in our industry, it's actually area that we don't actually will even touch, just because it's tax preparer related. Whoever signs off on the return is the person that needs to have that comfort level.
Gotcha.
So, do they have an aggressive CPA or conservative CPA? We're giving them basically the depreciation results or the answers of, how this property produces for them. Whether the CPA is able to, push that into, hey, you're going to not just offset your passive income, but also get into your personal W-2 income. Yeah, that's what they're willing to sign off on.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we sometimes have to, the extent of our, thoughts on that is pitching the benefit. I mean, if a property's only going to have passive income or losses, then what we may find or accelerating depreciation on a property may be limited to someone's benefit, by that passive amount. And so then it just end up, creating big losses that carry forward for years. So if someone is limited to just the passive income and losses on a property, they may not have to pay tax on it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, because what we find in doing a cost segregation analysis extends it that long.
Yeah.
To where if someone's, actually a qualified real estate professional, they can and have a big W-2 income, for example, they can burn through all that in 1 year. So
interesting. Phone lines are open. 651-647-2910. Evan, look at Evan. Look, give me the death stare. It's like, you gonna mess those numbers?
Text line during the show. I will be very, very unhappy.
Call in line 651-647-2910. Text line is 763-443-5664. Any questions for Mr. Jonathan Walgrave here on the short-term versus long-term rental stuff? Any mortgage or real estate questions are welcome. Again, that call-in line is 651-647-2910. And the text line is 763-443-5664. Still have those Saints tickets to give away.
Yep.
So we got 4 Saints tickets to give away to the best question of the morning here. Calling in or texting in gets you in the running for those tickets.
And we did have a text question come in too.
Perfect.
Alonzo had a financing question for us. He has about $200,000 in equity in his house right now, and they'd like to tap into it. Probably about $50,000 worth. Pay down some debt, do some house improvements, etc. They currently have an interest rate on their main loan of 3.25%, and they're wondering what the best option is. Should they refi? Should they get a HELOC, etc.?
Very tough to give up a 3.25% interest rate, right? So if you did a cash out refinance, you'd be sitting up there in the low sixes as far as a 30-year fix goes. So do you want to trade, your entire loan amount at a 3.25 for, let's say, even a 6.25? Probably not. You're probably better off adding a second mortgage to the mix in this case, whether it's a home equity line of credit where the rate is variable, or you can do a fixed second mortgage where the rate is fixed. That's going to be usually shorter term. They're usually like 15 to 20 years is the max fixed term that you can get on a second. That interest rate might be a little bit higher on that fixed rate, but at least the rate's not variable then too. So if it's one of those things where you want the flexibility of a line of credit, it's like, we want it available, we just don't know what we're going to do with it yet. Maybe go with a line of credit because then you can draw from it and pay it down as you wish. If you're like, yep, we're going to need the 50, let's do it right now, and we don't want any interest rate, fluctuations and things. We're just, we just want to know what we're going to get and be able to bank on that. Then just do a fixed rate second, pull that money out. It's a good question though. We get a lot of those questions now. It's kind of like, what do we do? Do we trade our 3.25 for something else? Is that the better play? Because second mortgages, so it's any sort of loan that's, in second lien position in your house, there's more risk there. So they have higher interest rates with them, and so then you got to outweigh. It's like, do we do the whole thing? Do we just add this on there? In this particular case, $50,000, do a second mortgage all day long.
I agree.
How about just getting qualified for HELOCs there? Let's say somebody's been in a property for 10 years there at 3.25%. It's like clearly worth way more than the loan is. Mm-hmm. Is that appraisal process streamlined now for those situations?
If you're not trying to max it out, so typically home equity lines of credit will let you go up to 90% of whatever the house is going to appraise for. So take your appraisal value times 90%, minus out your first mortgage balance, and that's the amount of second mortgage that you can get. If you're going up to there, they're probably going to require an appraisal. If you're only going to go up to 80%, they're probably just going to do like an automatic valuation model is what it's called, an AVM. So online appraisal, something like that, almost as like a Zillow type of deal where it's like, what's your house worth? $450. Kind of go online. Yeah, online kind of says it's pretty close to $452. We'll take it and go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because as long as you're not maxing it out, the risk there is pretty low. So they won't even make you get an appraisal in most cases there. But if you do want to go up to the max, up to the 90, they're probably going to have you do an appraisal on it.
Okay.
So, but appraisals are one of those things where people are surprised at how high the appraisals are still coming in at. I had one client literally that appraisal just came in 2 days ago. I said, well, what do you think the house is going to be worth? And they're like, it's probably, $375 to $390, maybe $400 tops. Came in at $471.
Wow. In
a house in Bloomington. And they're like, really? I'm like, so when it came in at, and they saw the comparables that they used and everything was on there, and it's obviously from a licensed real estate appraiser, it came in at $471. And they were thinking $375 to $390.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
Well, I mean, even your house. So you sold your house as part of the whole building the new house thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because weren't we talking? Wasn't it March of 2020? It was going to sell at a certain amount, and you waited until March of 2021, so you waited a year.
We were thinking like $385 to $400 it would sell for, and then and that turn of the next year came, and we're like, man, maybe this will go for $425, and ended up going for we were like $473.
Yeah.
And then actually after we met the buyer, he thought in his mind, he goes, I would have went to $5. He's like, I got a screaming deal on this. To where we were just like over $425. Like what? This is like the smallest house in the block, and then we actually found out from him too that his appraisal came in the 460s. So he didn't even, because one of his guarantees in his offer was that he would be able to financially cover that gap if the house only appraised for 425, but he needs whatever, to cover the 470. But he ended up appraising almost right up to what he offered. So
Yeah.
it was just wild. We didn't see that coming, but
So we saw a lot of that here too. It's like, the new construction was huge. So, I mean, all builders had record sales in 2021. 2020, I should say 2020, they had record sales. Now, having record closings was not the case because build cycles took longer, right? Because we had the whole supply chain stuff and labor stuff going on. So they sold more houses in that year than they could really build just because of the supply chain through COVID and stuff. And so a lot of people were hanging on to their house, right, a little bit longer. Well, we saw what happened in 2020, even going into 2021, home prices kept on going up. So now you're making an extra 50, 75. Sometimes people were making an extra $100,000 by waiting 12 months to sell their existing house.
that actually came in a little bit to our, I guess, easement of, rates going up is when we were getting into this new house going, you know what, we made probably an extra $7,500 on our house that we sold that we shouldn't have, that we didn't expect that.
Yeah.
So we might be paying another $7,500 in interest rates in the new one, but it came out in the wash.
Yeah. So you gain it on one end and lose it on the other. And we saw that a lot is because, especially if you're doing a custom build, the chances of you hitting your initial estimate on a custom build are almost zero. Yeah. To be honest with you, we built our home custom with Pebble Creek. I know you did a custom home build.
Yep.
You're not hitting that initial number. There's just no way.
Right.
And so that's nice because you were able to make it up. You lost on that side of things, but you gained, that and more on the sale of your house. And we saw a lot of that coming up here, with new construction.
We had a couple text questions come in here. If you've got a text question for the show, best question of the morning is going to win 4 St. Paul Saints tickets. Text line is 763-443-5664. That's 763-443-5664. Or if you want to call in, we've got about 10 minutes left in the show. 651-647-2910 is the call-in number. We've got a question here from Andy. How does depreciation work on short-term and long-term rentals?
Love it. I'll actually probably tee that up too to get into some really exotic tax differences between these two that you can't Google anywhere. So when it comes to the two properties, whether you're buying short-term or long-term, there's really not much depreciation differences or benefits either way. Like there's nothing that you're not going to make a decision on how you're going to use this property based on its actual tax depreciation benefits. So in essence, what we do as a cost segregation services, and I'll keep it simple for high level things. Let's say someone's buying a $500,000 property. We're coming through that and identifying first a land value to carve out because it's not depreciable, but then we're going through and looking at things that are removable, reusable, equipment in nature, things that might have any form of direct IRS guidance that allows them to be shorter property or shorter life property. So if you did nothing and you went out and acquired a property, you would generally be depreciating that over 39 years. So picture then every year you're essentially getting 1/39th of that basis that you get to deduct against your income on that property. We'll come through and anything that we can carve out that is eligible for shorter life, say it's landing in 5, 7, or 15 year buckets, which are generally personal property or land improvement type buckets. So, paving, landscaping, concrete sidewalks, aprons are things that would get like a 15-year tax life. Things that would be 5-year would be your, luxury vinyl flooring, carpet, your kitchen cabinetry, countertops, sinks, kitchen sinks, laundry hookups, electrical for anything that's like TV, low voltage. Any of those items that we're carving out and assigning value to will get a shorter life of, generally 5 years. So if we're carving, say 20% of a basis into that shorter life, then anything that's in those 5, 7, or 15-year lives right now, still through the rest of 2022, get a 100% bonus. So you get a full deduction or full write-off on that. So, we find $100,000 on a $500,000 property, you're deducting $100,000 in year one versus 1/39th of 500, which is a lot smaller number.
Right.
So where this stuff gets a little different between the two is, I guess I'm going to probably call it obscure rule. And that's this going back, I mentioned earlier about transient use. And transient use, what, how the IRS is identifying something being residential property or not is based on that 30 days or that 1 month. So if somebody is in a long-term rental and it's rented for more than 30 days, which, in the reality, you're leasing these things for 12 months at a time, they get actually a 27.5-year life, not a 39-year. Short-term rentals being, generally used for days, weeks, anything less than a month, are actually not considered in IRS terms residential property. They're commercial.
Oh, interesting.
So, because in order to be residential, you have to pass the definitions of it, which are the use and 80% from residential rental income. So these short terms then will get the 39-year life, which is what most properties that we're doing are 39-year life. I'm saying in general for cost sake, commercial, retail, all those things are going to end up with a 39-year life. So when it comes to apartments, single-family homes, duplexes, any of those things, they generally get the 27.5 unless they're used for short term. Then they are 39.
39. Interesting.
So where some exotic stuff get in is actually Jason Walgrave and I were having this conversation just a few weeks ago on that place that they're building on Prior Lake, or that they bought. Mm-hmm. There is a rule out there, a classification of property called qualified improvement property. This stemmed a few years back. Essentially what it is anybody that performs improvements to a property that is interior in nature, non-structural, doesn't enlarge the building, and doesn't involve things like elevators or escalators, gets a special 15-year life. And so that can include, generally otherwise structural items. Like, let's say you're adding new partitions, new walls, things that don't get a shorter tax life, they can still fall under this qualified improvement property bucket and get a 15-year life. And anything less than 20 years gets the 100% bonus right now. So it's like a full write-off.
Yeah.
Well, qualified improvement property, or what we call QIP, is not eligible for rental properties. So we'll have people right now that are really following the letter of the law and exploiting the benefit here. And they will, if they're buying a rental property that they know is going to need a bunch of improvements right away, they will, and they plan on using it for long term, in that first year after they're buying the property and performing these improvements, they will actually list it and treat it as a short-term rental property, so that they are writing off via qualified improvement property 100% bonus all the improvements they're putting onto this place. And then at the turn of the year, the next year comes and they'll now no longer list as a short-term rental, and they'll turn it into long-term. But now they already wrote off all the basis they put into it. Because some of these people are buying, they may buy a property for $500,000, they're probably putting $250,000 into it that we're seeing.
Wow.
People are buying dilapidated houses and, hey, let's pump this thing up and get it all ready to go. And if they did that entirely as a long-term, they might only be able to deduct 20% of that $250,000. Versus they're writing off all of it by treating this thing as a short-term rental, so that they can get the qualified improvement benefit. Right.
Do you think the IRS will catch on to this and change that rule, or
so far we're not? So our group, ICS Tax, we are part of a national association of cost segregation professionals, the ASCSP. We've actually brought this up on a massive scale with them. It's actually one of our relationships where a client of ours acquired an entire casino. We're talking somewhere in Nevada, and they're converting this thing from casino hotels to apartments and commercial. So they're going to put in, gyms, fitness centers, Caribou's, Starbucks type stuff on the first 2 floors that used to be casino gaming floors. Yeah. And then everything above it is going to be now converted to apartments. In that case, while this is going on, their first, year or two of construction, they're watching to make sure that they're not getting more than 80% of their income from residential rentals or these new apartments that they're putting in. So they're keeping this building as commercial. So they're in that scale, we're talking about these guys writing off $250 million in improvements on this thing under these rules. So following the letter of the law, the IRS, I don't think is really going to see it yet,
Okay.
or have any concern. It's the rules. So you're basically passing a property as short-term rental, and then you convert it into long-term. There's
Gotcha.
nothing against that.
We did have another text question come in here. If you got a text question for the show, 763-443-5664 is the text in line. 763-443-5664. Friend of the show, Big Biggie, texted in. He wants to know, what kind of financing options are there for short-term and long-term rentals if it's an LLC, not a second home? How much down payment, rates, etc.?
So on the financing side of things, there's really no difference between short-term and long-term rental. As far as being able to use the rental income, that's where it comes into play. So if you're going to buy an investment property in a standard conventional loan, investment property is one of those properties that you're going to rent out. You can use rental income from that subject property that you're going to buy, and the amount you can use is 75% of whatever the long-term rental is. Because short-term rentals is, what's your weekly rate going to be, or your nightly rate going to be? Are you going to have it rented out for 1 week a month, 2 weeks a month? You don't know, right? It's too unpredictable as to far as what you're going to consistently get in. And when mortgages, on the mortgage side of things, it's your monthly in versus your monthly out. As long as your debt to income ratio between those two is fine, you can qualify. So if you need that rental income on that property, they're just going to look at long-term rental. If you were going to rent this out long-term wise, what's the market rents for this type of property? You can use 75% of that number, and the appraiser does that for you on the appraisal to say market rents for this single family home in this area goes for this. We can use 75% of that to qualify, and then whether you make it a long-term or short-term is up to you after that. If you don't need the rental income to qualify because you make enough income from your regular job and you don't need it, then you don't need it. Then it doesn't matter at that point. Yeah. If you're financing an LLC, so if that's your personal name, so if you're going to finance in the name of LLC, now you're not getting a 30-year fixed or anything like that because you can't do a standard conventional loan. So now you're getting a 7-year ARM or a 10-year ARM, might be a 20 or 25-year term, something like that, because you're financing in the name of LLC and not in the name of a natural person.
Yeah,
that's a good question, though.
It's a great question.
It's a great question because there's a lot of differences as far as LLC versus personal, short-term versus long-term, all that fun stuff there. So that's a whole nother discussion we can have next week there. But we appreciate everyone listening here. We're here every Saturday from 7 to 8 a.m. here on ESPN Radio. We'll be back next week. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.
This has been a paid program. The views expressed were not necessarily those of the management or ownership of KSTP AM 1500 ESPN.